Hey folks, Carl Kuster here. Just wanted to talk to everybody about some of the character traits between the expert and the X. We've been riding these things, or we've been testing them in engineering for, the 32-inch for probably 4 or 5 years, and versions of this suspension in the rear and A-arms in the X for probably 3 or 4 years. Let's kind of dive into the X and we'll talk about just some of the handling characteristics and the traits of the snowmobile. A lot of the other ambassadors did a great job of laying out all the technological changes between each model. Obviously, in the X, we have the forged aluminum A-arms up front, so that helps in weight reduction. Also, we have in the rear a coil over rear suspension on the rear shock. Went away from the torsion. And this is definitely a firmer ride than any of the X's have been in the past. So as far as, a little more aggressive suspension, this thing is valved and, calibrated to, handle the bumps pretty good. It's not a free ride, but it's not the old X either. So let's hop right in and talk about the characteristics of the sled. We've come to know the X as really the lightest snowmobile that's in the mountain lineup for Skidoo, or in the Summit series. And this year it's 14 pounds lighter. So really you can just squeeze with your legs and put your weight here, and the X responds really nice. Even with the coilover in the 26X, it still has T-motion and flex edge track, so it's still very pliable. Think of this thing as like more the enduro bike. It stays hooked up, it's got good traction. If you're more motocross, then maybe the Expert is a little more run and gun, keep your speed, ripping stuff, bouncing off of things. Where the X is really still the most nimble, especially playing in the trees. And I really wanted to talk about, the size, because if you're really tall, you have lots of leverage. You probably don't need a 32-inch front end, because you really don't. You have so much leverage if you're really tall that you don't necessarily need a narrow front end. But if you're smaller and a really aggressive rider, let's say 5'8", and you're 140 pounds before you put your gear on, then a 32 in the Expert, that is a pretty good choice. For most of the clients that come here to CKMP, overall, out of 500 to 600 people, everybody kind of gravitates towards the X, just because at the end of the day, you just have more energy left. Not that many of our customers are doing freestyle and backflips, but there is a few that are definitely very aggressive, wicked riders. And in the softer snow, the X will do everything. Yeah, does it cut across the hard ruts and stuff? No, not as good as the Expert, but at the end of the day, the X still is the least amount of energy. It is the easiest sled that Skidoo has ever built in a mountain sled, period. On the Expert, the thing you'll notice most is the 32-inch front end. And yes, it's narrow, but it handles way better on the trail than you would think, because of the twin link steering in there, and they reduced the scrub or bump steer. Really did a great job on the geometry of the front end of this thing. And when you're in the ruts, or let's say rough snow, with the narrow stance, the 32, and the no T-motion and no flex edge, it does definitely hold a line, but it takes some effort to do that. Not a horrible amount, It's noticeably more than the X of the effort you have to put in, but the result is it cuts straight across. The X tends to do this a little bit, a small amount of kayaking as you're going through the rough stuff. But if you want to do it, ride fast and hard and aggressive, you know, then this is a fantastic sled and it's a great setup. I wouldn't be disappointed if I had to ride either one. I'm not really that biased to one or the other than the X to me, because it's 14 pounds lighter, really makes a difference in my eyes. But another really nice feature is the skis are turns very sharp. When you're on the edge of this thing, you know, and you want to hook and go above the creek, or, you know, you're going downhill and you want to go on the side, you can side hill or counter steer and get this thing up on edge. And by turning it steeper, it definitely does it more aggressively. One thing you'll notice about riding an expert versus any of the other summits or free ride is, man, you do not have to be wrong foot forward on this. Like, very, very rare. It is, you know, feet kind of on the outside edge of the running boards, because you want your weight furthest away from center line as possible. When you go to side hill these things, or an expert, you very rarely take your foot off the other side. I just hook my legs or squeeze my legs like this, and that's all you'll ever need. If you're coming from a different brand, it's easy to tend to override it because you're used to using so much more energy, whereas now it's really easy to get it on edge. You know, people may ask about paneling out. It's definitely better than the Gen 4 with a 34-inch was, and it really helps because now, because their steering is so much sharper, you can get the ski out in either way. If it starts to panel, man, you can just hook it and the ski will catch, because it turns way steeper than previous snowmobiles. So it'll hook and go. It just does take a little bit of to get used to, because it is very responsive. That's the best way to put it. You have to spend some time on it, but it is a very, very capable sled. Well, hopefully that information was helpful in your decision to pick Expert or X. There's no real wrong answer. We just hope that some of that information will help the decision-making process easier. See you on the snow.